Hi, so my name is Bill Buchanan, and I lead a podcast on the world leaders in cryptography. And today I have a true world leader, Jean Tsudik. Hi, Jean.
Hi, Bill. Nice to meet
Yeah.
you.
Jean is a distinguished and ICS Alumni Professor of Computer Science at the University of California, Irvine, and where he has been since 2000. His research covers areas of security, privacy, and cryptography. From 1991 to 1996, he was a researcher at the IBM Zurich Research Laboratory and then at the Information Science Institute until 2000. Jean is a Fulbright scholar and a fellow of the ACM, IEEE, AAAS, and IFIP. From 2009 to 2015, he was the editor-in-chief of the ACM Transactions on Privacy and Security, known as TOPS. Over the years, he has received a number of awards, including the ACM SIGSAC Outstanding Contribution Award, the 2020 IFIP Jean-Claude Laprie Award, the 2023 ACM SIGSAC Outstanding Innovation Award, and a 2005 Guggenheim Fellowship. Quite amazing. So, what's your current role and what does a typical day involve for you?
Um, I haven't realized how long and boring my bio is. It's always it looks better on in print than it does when people talk about it because it just drags on. But so I apologize for that. My job is purely as a professor these days. I've had sometimes administrative positions in my academic career, but these days I'm basically a run-of-the-mill professor. Occasionally I teach when I have to. I'm not God's gift to teaching, but I do it because I have to, and sometimes I even enjoy it. But generally, I what I really enjoy is mentoring PhD students and working with PhD students, and also collaborating with a group of colleagues, which of course is a dynamic group all over the world, including, of course, UC Irvine and various places around the world.
Yeah.
So my day is basically some quiet time in the morning where I get to do some real work. Then I get to campus around 11 a.m. and I generally ask my group, with mixed success, to be around from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. minus lunch. So that way we have like a core of the day to run into each other, have impromptu conversations and group meetings. But I am terrible at scheduling, so a lot of things in my group happen kind of spontaneously and impromptu.
Yeah. And so what were your school days like? Were you a great pupil at school or a difficult one?
Definitely not the former. Not sure I was like really difficult, but I was not a kind of high-flying performer. In my undergraduate days, I kind of fell into computer science because after sitting in a few lectures of mechanical engineering and then quickly switching to math, and then a month later having enough of pure maths and being kind of at a crossroads, I ran into somebody who recommended this kind of a relatively exotic major at the time of computer science. So I switched to that, and yeah, the rest is history. But my undergraduate days, I did okay. I didn't get top marks. I did all right. My main kind of positive experience in undergraduate days was doing internships, industrial internships, and I wound up doing a couple at uh, what was back then a giant of industry. Maybe you remember IBM.
Yeah.
So
Still are.
yes,
Still are a giant.
they are but a shadow of a former self. But back
Yeah.
then in the late 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, they were a giant, and I really enjoyed my time as a student working at various places at IBM. And then in graduate school, I kind of became a more disciplined student, and things got more streamlined for me.
That's great. And so what sparked your interest in mass cryptography?
I always had an interest in math, but I'm kind of easily bored. So, like I said before, I try to major in math, and the first course on topology just killed me. I just got bored to tears. And I liked certain types of math, but not all. And I just couldn't get through topology. But I always maintained some interest in math. And in graduate school, what I really wasn't initially drawn to cryptography, but then I had the good fortune of taking a course from Leonard Edelman, the A in
From
RSA,
RSA,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and it was kind
Wow.
of a little bit of a hodgepodge. It was a course on modern crypto and computer viruses, which was quite exotic at the time because viruses just kind of got defined by one of the PhD students of Edelman only a couple of years before I took the course, and that was fascinating. And I got very much into trying to understand crypto, but at the time, the coursework was fairly minimal that was offered at USC, where I did my graduate school. So I kind of learned on my own wherever I could. Back then, you had to go to the library, so internet existed, but it was not what it is today. So you had to pretty much go to the library and pick at paper, old-fashioned paper articles from journals generally, or from conference proceedings like crypto, Eurocrypt. They had already been around. Um, I didn't learn as much as I should have, but I tried. And then towards the end of my PhD, I started looking at some applied crypto problems. I never got into the theory of crypto because I just didn't have the background for that. But I had a couple of like forays into applied cryptography using like some slightly innovative use of message authentication codes for various networking problems and using hash functions for authentication, which today sounds very quaint, but back then it was kind of novel.
Yeah. And so, who was the cryptographer that really stimulated your interest? I mean, you obviously talk about Len Edelman, but there was obviously people like Whitfield Diffie and Marty Hellman. I know you did a lot in key exchange later on in your work. Whose work
Yeah,
would you say that really stimulated that interest?
it wasn't like an overnight thing. I mean, so first, definitely Leonard Edelman. And then my own advisor was not in any way a crypto person, or actually even security person. She was very much a internet and networking person, who had interest in security. But her general interests were more in like internet routing and all kinds of internet protocols. So originally I wasn't really going to do a thesis on security, but then it kind of gradually morphed into internet security, and that necessitated some applied crypto work. But actually, the interest started more when I went to IBM Research in Zurich, where actually I am right now, coincidentally. Um, and I started working in a group that was like three, four people putting together a generic network authentication and authorization service, essentially recreating Kerberos, if you know,
Mhm.
familiar
Yeah,
with Kerberos.
Kerberos. Yeah.
But back then Kerberos was thought of as like a hodgepodge, right? A kind of an ad hoc system that was very useful, very cool, but very little could be said formally about it.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it provided no cryptographic guarantees, no real security guarantees at the time. Um, and so we were building something like Kerberos from scratch. And one of my colleagues, who was not a crypto person actually, started this line of work on essentially systematically or kind of formally proving security of cryptographic protocols. And that led, he doesn't get enough credit for it, but that I think sparked a whole avalanche of work that followed in early to late 90s, even 2000s, and goes on till today. And his name is Rifik Mova, and
Mhm.
he was at the time of IBM Research, but then moved to Euricom Institute in France and only recently retired. But I have to give him credit for that. And that sparked my interest in more in actual cryptographic protocols and finding flaws and kind of looking at them in a kind of holistic way.
Mhm.
And then I also had really good fortune of collaborating with a great team of actual cryptographers at IBM TJ Watson. And some of the people there are today like the very top of the crypto ecosystem, like people like Hugo Kravchuk, who I think today is at Amazon
Yeah.
Labs, and Moti Jung, who is
Motti, yeah.
at Google, right? And a couple others like Amir Hertzberg at University, now at University of Connecticut, and Juan Garay, who is at Texas A&M. So all these people were like an incredible team of cryptographers, and I learned quite a few things from them, kind of by osmosis. Um, and then little by little, we started getting into more cryptographic protocols. So my interest in like group key agreement
Mm,
and all these group key protocols stemmed from my time at IBM,
mm. Yeah.
and went on for a number of years afterwards. And I kind of
Until now, yeah.
kept it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. And so I think you've written some poetry based on cryptography. Why did you do that?
Uh, that was a, I don't know, sort of hilarious. To me, it is a hilarious story, but I'm not sure it's so funny to anybody else. Uh, I was teaching applied crypto to undergraduates at UCI, uh, and after a while, I just noticed people's eyes were glazing over when I talked about cryptographic protocols and their properties. And I remember like having a frank discussion with students, and I think somebody said, one of them actually said, well, there's just no excitement in cryptography. It doesn't seem poetic. And that word, it doesn't seem poetic. It kind of stuck with me.
Mhm.
And then years later, like at least 10 years later, I was having drinks with a friend, and who's also in network security, who's a security person, not a cryptographer, but we were discussing how to teach cryptography. And he said the same thing, kind of says, no, there's no poetry in cryptography. And I said, oh, yeah? Well, how about I prove you wrong? And I don't think he took it seriously. I didn't take it seriously, but a month or so later, I had like a couple of days downtime and I decided to try it. And so I tried it, and rather awkward poem or two came out.
So,
And indeed, one of them was published in a kind of a joke published at a um, crypto affiliated conference,
yeah.
and was even refereed.
Repeat. That was excellent.
Yes.
I don't suppose you can remember just a couple of lines from these
Well, I am
poems.
terrible at reciting
Yeah.
poetry. I just don't have the gravitas and the voice. But it was basically like this. It was about it was about it's essentially describing Diffie-Hellman
Hmm.
in verse, right? And then it went as a warm-up, like, and then it went on to Fiat Shamir, right?
Excellent.
So essentially zero knowledge, and that was the thing. I think most people were like having their eyes glazed over when zero knowledge came into play. The average undergraduate student, at least at UC Irvine, I was having a hard time understanding zero
Mm.
knowledge. Even with
Yeah.
all the cute pictures like the famous zero knowledge cave, which is
Mm.
supposed to
Yeah.
be very analog and
Alibaba. Yeah.
illustrative. Yeah, and just even that was not doing its job. So I tried
Mm.
poetry. People certainly had a good laugh. I had a set of slides with it, so that were slightly humorous, and so
Yeah.
I think I penetrated a few more skulls that way,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
can't claim like a resounding success.
Yeah. And I think probably you need a guitar or something like that, and you need your students
Yes,
to have a few drinks probably to really help to.
you're absolutely right. If I could play a musical instrument like a guitar, and
Yeah.
if I could serve them a couple of drinks, which of course would
Yeah.
get me fired, I
Yeah.
would be a lot more successful.
Good. And so you've studied many areas, and I think your citation count is massive, and you've worked on many different cryptographic areas. But what would you say your favorite area of cryptography actually is?
Okay, that's a tough one. Well, first of all, can I clarify one thing? So, you're interviewing leaders in cryptography, and while I'm happy to be one of the leaders, I'm not an actual cryptographer. I'm more like an imposter. Uh, my strength isn't in cryptography. I just love it. I love doing it, but I'm much more of an amateur than most people that you interview.
I
Uh,
think we're all amateurs in this area. Well, many of us So I wouldn't undersell yourself.
I mean, I just looking at myself and comparing to people who actually do cryptography full time, I'm definitely in comparison a part-timer at best. But coming back to your actual question, the part that I liked the most was some work we did about 12, 14 years ago on what is today called, well, even back then, it was called private set operations, chiefly private set intersection protocols and various variations on the theme. And so, are you familiar with the notion?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So back then, it wasn't so. The need for these protocols was not out there in practice, right? We were postulating some examples that seemed very kind of uh, hypothetical at the time. But today, a lot of industry giants are actually, using private set intersection and private set intersection cardinality, and there are other types of related protocols in the real world on a daily basis with massive data sets. I don't know what the chief application is today, the most demanding application, but I suspect it has to do with like malware fingerprints, comparing malware, one entity like a company has a set of malware fingerprints and another company has its own set of fingerprints. They don't want to reveal them to each other, but they want to see if they have stuff in common. And so they run these kinds of protocols. I'm sure there are many other better examples, but I don't follow the industry trends too much. But that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed working on these kinds of protocols.
Yeah. And I think you published work that focused on on scalable and efficient data possession, or
Uh-huh.
PDP. Can you outline what PDP is and how it works?
Yeah. So a provable data possession is essentially the following scenario. The data is farmed out to the cloud. Okay. So let's say I'm a corporation, you are the cloud provider. I farm out to you a massive amount of data. Maybe it's archival data, or maybe it's working data, which I access periodically. But if it's a data that I access periodically and constantly, the problem doesn't occur as much. But suppose more like this is a data that I am essentially archiving with you. All right, this is a better example setting. And so what I don't know, if I don't trust you fully, is whether you actually have my data properly archived. Now, maybe you, instead of keeping it online, maybe you have backed it up to tapes or some other, dinosaur style storage, and you don't make it available online. But since I don't query it often, right? How would I know? Or maybe you lost it, or maybe you just never really archived it, just charged me the money for it and never really archived it. So the idea is how to spot check for the um, essentially for your compliance, right? So if you're the provider, I want to check you to make sure that you comply with the archival agreement. And so I could always ask you for the entire data back. I just say, I gave you petabytes of data to store. Why don't you give it back to me? If you don't give it back to me, you're lying, right? Then you're in violation of our agreement. But that's unscalable, right? Every time I want to make sure you have my data, I don't want to get the entire thing back. So the idea is then how to do it, how to efficiently check in a way that is statistically gives you this very high probability that the provider, the cloud provider, does not cheat,
Mm.
right? And um, and that work was very popular at the time. I think it's fairly timely even today. There's been a lot of um, fundamental results, even like 15 years ago and ever since. But I should give credit where credit is due. I had played a role in this work, but most of the credit goes to actually my first PhD student, Giuseppe Ateniese, um, who I think first got us the group interested in that idea, and he is currently at George Mason University, and another at the time a PhD student, no, Roberto Di Pietro, who was at the University of Rome, but now is at KAUST in Saudi Arabia as a professor there. And so I think they deserve the lion's share of the credit for this work.
Mm. Yeah. And I think you worked in areas of group signatures. Could you outline how a group signature works and how we can secure them?
Yeah. So group signatures in a nutshell work like this. Essentially, you have a elastic group of entities, people, right? Let's say could be people, could be just like entities. And they're members of this group. And any member of the group can sign using their credential, a private key, if you will, in such a way that anyone from the outside who has a constant size group public key can verify that this signature was produced by a bona fide member of the group. Now, at the same time, they have no idea who that is. Moreover, if given two group signatures that are valid, you cannot, as a verifier, tell whether they're generated by two members or one member. So obviously, it can't be more than two, but it might be two or it may be the same person who signed twice, but you can't tell. And so imagine something like this in a maybe a little contrived example, but like, I don't know, member of parliament, right? There's a finite number of people, but the population changes, right, with elections and so on. So you have this relatively, well, you have a dynamic group, but it doesn't change on like a daily basis, right? But it does change. And so, an MP may want to sign an official document saying this comes from the parliament, right? An MP signed it, but they don't want to reveal who signed it. Now, this so far, what I've described sounds pretty easy to do. You just give everybody the same key, and assuming they keep it secret, they can sign as a member of the group. But what's lacking here is the misbehavior clause. The misbehavior clause is like this, that if somebody misbehaves and like, say an MP signs some horrific racist statement or something like that, or, some call to violence, and then it's like a blatant violation of the rules, somebody has to open that signature and be able to identify the culprit. And so that's one thing we need for group signatures to work, right? This ability to trace under certain drastic conditions the actual signer. And the other thing that one cannot do with a single global key is one cannot revoke. Right? So the other thing that group signatures, to be practical, they need the ability to revoke members. Right? So it's a set of very kind of interesting requirements that make a group signature scheme. If you take away one of them, it's not difficult. But if you want to satisfy all of them, then it becomes a challenge. And
Yeah.
this was a very hot area back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and even further onwards. Um, there are lots of work by many different people. I did a small part in this general area and took part in this one effort that resulted in a crypto 2000 paper that proposed one at the time most efficient and the first provably secure group signature scheme. But there's been a lot of work since, and much more efficient and as well as provably secure schemes have been proposed since. Variations of such schemes exist today in TPM, right?
Mm.
Something called direct anonymous attestation that is embedded in each trusted platform module in all of our like non-Apple laptops. It supports a form of group signatures, among other things.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's good. And I think in cryptocurrency, it was advanced quite a bit through Zcash, Monero, where you can actually take someone and create a group of similar types of profiles so that the actual
Right.
user
There is a
is
difference.
hidden.
Oh,
Yeah.
there is a difference here. Uh, there is a related concept called ring signatures.
Yeah.
Uh, it's similar to group signatures, but it does not have a bootstrapping entity like a group manager. It does not have that. A ring
Yeah.
signature can be essentially bootstrapped by a group, by a ring of peers. Um, So I think I'm not very knowledgeable about cryptocurrencies, but I
Yeah.
believe what you're describing is using this ring signature concept.
The ring, yeah. So a
Yeah.
group is very much useful in something like money laundering. For example, you want to keep the privacy of the user, but just in case there is an investigation around money laundering, you want to be
Yeah.
able to identify who it was, but you don't want that to be broken straight away. So very much more a trusted grouping of entities would form the group.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And you published a range of papers on key agreement. What are the basic principles of key agreement over a group, and what's the limitations and barriers that this faces?
Group key agreement. Well, that was a fairly lengthy chapter in my work. That was started back in IBM Research at the end of my stay there and continued till, I don't know, mid-aughts, like still around 2005 or so. Anyway, I found it very intellectually kind of engaging, this type of work. At the time, there were already, when I started working in this field, there were already some group key agreement or group key distribution protocols. Not a lot, two or three. Um, we wanted to create an alternative. At the time, we were looking at electronic commerce and various group settings in electronic commerce. If you recall, mid-late 90s were the electronic commerce era. And so we thought we had a good motivation to work on group key agreement. But I hate to sort of burst my own bubble here, but in many ways, this work was actually not very useful. And if you care to hear why, I can give you a very quick summary of why. Because all these key agreements techniques, um, essentially, as opposed to key distribution, right? So the key distribution is one party generates a key and delivers it via two-party channels, right? Secure channels to every other member of the group. That's key distribution. That's old, boring, traditional kind of thing. Uh, as opposed to key agreement, where magically you have this black box protocol where every party essentially enters its own contribution to the key. And at the end, magically, everybody has a key, a group key, to which they contributed and everybody else contributed, more or less equally, right? The problem is that kind of fundamentally, this is, although it's an intellectually stimulating concept and leads to interesting papers and protocols, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if you look at the security, where is the security of, let's say, key distribution? Security of key distribution is based on the security of the least secure participant. Because if one party generates like this group key and delivers it via pairwise secure channels to every other group member, then the secure channel with the least security determines the security of the entire scheme. Well, it turns out the same is true with group key agreement protocols. Because everybody's contribution to the group key, the share that they contribute, is based on some secret, usually a random number or pseudo-random number generated, right? Secret. Then if everybody's pseudo-random number generators are great and strong and one party has a weak pseudo-random number generator, the whole thing is gone. So you see, my argument, and I'm not sure, real cryptographers would buy it, is that there's no sense in group key agreement. You might as well do group key distribution because the added complexity isn't worth the added because there's no added security fundamentally.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think in 2001, you analyzed the security of onion routing. What were your main findings in this? And is onion routing still a good solution for modern systems?
So it wasn't exactly that. What it was is myself and several people from back then Naval Research Lab, NRL, mainly Paul Syverson, kind of the godfather of Tor,
Yeah.
right? He and I got together because I did some work on anonymous email, which was also popular back then. And I think if Paul would say that the onion term comes from that work on anonymous mail, because we use layers and called them onion layers and etc. But when he was designing the first generation Tor, what he kind of invited me to join this effort. And what we did is not analyze, we formally kind of specified it. We specified I think at the time, I thought in excruciating detail how onion routing works and how to look at it from a security perspective. We didn't analyze it looking for flaws. We were analyzing it. We were mainly like presenting it in great detail so it can be analyzed, if you will. Now, I think it's practical today, but for not for all types of communication. And if you look at Tor today, it doesn't actually use onion routing for like normal synchronous communication. It's too expensive. Right? It does what's called a circuit setup, and it uses kind of a related scheme, kind of like similar to onion routing, to establish this onion circuit, or to establish the circuit, and then it uses, I believe, some very fast stream cipher, right, at every hop.
Yeah.
So it had its place at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And what is an oblivious digital token?
This is a very recent work, as you've probably seen. Very interesting kind of application domain. So oblivious digital token is a kind of a, if you will, an emblem that a device should demonstrate to putative malware and use that token to convince that putative malware that it is a protected device. I don't know if it makes sense. This is the idea that is in the analog physical world, similar to Red Cross protected installations. So in analog warfare, right, historically analog warfare, in recent decades, we have Geneva Convention and we have all kinds of other sort of gentlemanly agreements among countries, not always respected, of course, that say, look, if something is a humanitarian asset, like an old folks home or a hospital or a school, that this is a protected asset and you should not bomb it, you should not strafe it, you should not shoot at it. So in the cyber world, right, cyber warfare that is increasingly becoming reality, it is reality. The idea that is that some organizations like the ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross, would like to have an equivalent to the analog protection methods, right? But it's really easy to say, but super hard to do. And the ODT that you referred to that is described in a recent paper, it is, I must say, it's collaboration with ETH Zurich, David Bason's group, and one of his PhD students is the main driver of this work. I mean, who did, again, the lion's share of hard work. And so it's myself and, of course, the ETH group, and then another colleague from Singapore Management University. But the bulk of the work is done at ETH Zurich. They have contacts with the International Red Cross, being in Switzerland, and it's a very noble effort. We're not there yet. We're not. The complexity of requirements that are necessary to mimic in the cyber world what we do in the physical world, to protect humanitarian assets is really hard. It's really high complexity. And so it's more like I try to convey this with group signatures, like many requirements, very difficult to satisfy all of them, right? In practice, well, this oblivious digital token is a kind of a requirement, it's kind of set of requirements where we don't know exactly how to satisfy well today. The paper that I mentioned is a decent attempt but it's not the end of the road by any means.
Yeah, it's difficult because who do you trust to be able
Yeah,
to create this token, and who's the verifier of it? Like we use
exactly.
PKI just now, but obviously whoever runs the PKI has the advantage of defining who's trusted or not.
Right. So you basically, it's the kind of world that we rarely see in cryptography. It is a world where everybody is an adversary. You see, in a world of cyber warfare, you have a device, right? Let's say it's a hospital administrator's laptop. And obviously it's a protected device, so you should have a markings somewhere inside it, a marking or an emblem or this digital token that says, I am a protected device. But this should not be copyable, right? This should not be replicatable so that the owner of that, some country A can replicate and make all of its offensive devices suddenly protected, right? At the same time, the malware that breaks into this device doesn't want to be discovered. So it doesn't want to ask in the open, are you a protected device? Because the moment it asks, are you a protected device, it reveals itself as malware and it will be wiped or quarantined, right? So you have these very conflicted, and any check that this malware does on the protection status of the device that it infected has to be oblivious. Do you see? Because if it does it in any overt detectable way, then the whole scheme goes out of the window. And that's just one of the uh, strange little nuances in this world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult. And so, what was the issue that you investigated in the work, which focused on exploring data brokers' CCPA compliance?
Uh, um, well, that's about as far from cryptography as you could
Mm.
possibly get and still be in sort of the general area of security or privacy more than security. The work you're referring to, we came upon it kind of by accident, sort of. It's basically has to do with these pesky or notorious types of entities called data brokers. Uh, you have a few of them in the UK, but it's mostly an American phenomena, sadly,
Yeah,
that goes back to the pre-internet days of the 1980s. They collect data about individuals like you and I without our knowledge, right? Most of them do. There are a few kind of reputable ones, but overwhelming majority.
Equifax, people like
Yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah,
The credit rating agencies
yeah.
in the US we have four of them, I think, the big
Yeah.
ones, and maybe like a half a dozen are like well known and sort of reputable, but they also collect information without our knowledge.
Mm,
And then
mm.
there are hundreds and hundreds of other all kinds of shady sounding agencies and companies. And so in California, we have this sort of forward-thinking law that modeled on the GDPR, right? But it goes a little further in that it tackles the data broker issue, and it says that the consumers, California consumers, have the right to ask the data brokers to delete information about them,
Mm.
opt out of collecting information, and access the information, actually get a copy of what they have on them. But the difficult issue is that in the process, you are supposed to perform identity verification. So you don't want somebody like me asking them to access your information, right? So I
Yeah.
have to identify myself, and that requires identity verification based on potentially personally identifiable sensitive information. So we have a conundrum here, right? I don't know if a data broker has information about me, but in order to see whether they do, I have to provide them with sensitive information about me, which they, of course, happy to have
Yeah.
because they can record from me or add to the existing record. So we first wanted, actually, originally we wanted to look at that and design some cryptographic protocols that would somehow do this with privacy, right? Uh, but in order to see how what the landscape is like, we decided to actually do a kind of a study, a user study. And one of my bright PhD students kind of used herself as a guinea pig and used her own data to
Wow.
query 550 or so data brokers and see what the results are. And the results were quite shocking. Uh, some of them just totally did not respect the law. They returned not, they never answered her. And that's against the law. Some of them answered late. They're supposed to have only like 45 days, but they answered very, very late. Some returned information unrelated to her. Some returned sensitive information about other people that are not
Wow.
her. So it was a kind of mess all over the place. And well, this summary of the findings were published or made available. And but the work is really a gateway into a more technical solution that we'd like to propose of how a consumer like say me, not you because you're not a California resident, but I think, but somebody like me can, or maybe an average, not tech savvy person can sit in front of a terminal or a laptop and in one shot provide some sensitive information that will be transmitted kind of in a scrambled way, in a secure way, to some place where you'll be a kind of a private set operation that will see whether the particular data broker has a record for that consumer. And if they don't, then they find out nothing. But if they do, then they perform oblivious identity verification and return the data or the decision if it's a delete or opt-out.
Yeah.
So,
And I suppose the problem that we have now is, can I remove my data from a Gen AI machine learning model?
oof.
If it's already in there, that's an even more complex
Oh,
issue.
much, much harder problem. Much harder problem. I mean, I'm sure smart people, lots of smart people are actually working on this. How do you do, the basic problem is provable machine unlearning,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so there is work on unlearning, essentially removing features of a particular model, right? But how to do it in a provable way, I'm not sure is done. Now, I'm not following the that literature or constantly, but I suspect it hasn't been done yet.
no. I think a good deal of your recent work is focused on exploring device authentication. It's a big area of research just now. What are the methods that can be used to enhance the security of this authentication, and what are the current gaps in the field?
Uh, I think by device authentication, you mean the IoT, the work on the sort of embedded
IoT,
IoT devices.
that's right. Yeah,
Um, well, in that domain, it's not so much the authentication of the device, but rather it's authentication coupled with the status of the software that the device runs. Because you see, just authentication of the device is not all that difficult if you assume certain trust anchor or root of trust on that device, maybe a TPM or some kind of a trusted execution environment, um, or something even smaller and custom. But that's enough for authenticating the device. But checking that the device, or getting a status of what software the device runs, what is its software state, is more important because you want to know whether you can trust the device, right? In a general sense, the device may be far away. Like think about yourself. Okay, maybe now you're at home, but let's say you go to the office and you have a device at home, like some kind of a smart assistant, voice assistant, or a smart refrigerator, whatever. And you want to, from remote location, attest, essentially, that's the word we use, attest that your device and see that it's in a good state. Well, if it's in a good state, does it have like the expected software, or has it been perhaps compromised by malware, right? And so this entails device authentication, but it's a little bit more than that, right? So you need authentication together with a software kind of a integrity check, coupled together. And it doesn't seem very difficult or even very interesting or challenging at the outset. But if you start digging into it, well, authentication protocols typically are like two shot. They send you a challenge, you sign it, or you mark it and you return it, right? That's authentication 101. But attestation requires you to do that plus couple with it this some kind of a hash of the entire software that you run. And that's a lengthy process, you see. especially for small devices. And so during the time you're computing a hash, or let's say of the software, the device may need to actually run. And these devices are tiny. They don't have multi-core CPUs, right? And so that brings in some interesting challenges. Most of
Yeah.
them have been luckily addressed, not just by my group, but a few other groups around the world have been looking into the device authentication or an attestation, if you will. But it's an interesting topic that kept us busy for a
It's
bit.
good. And what's IoT Armageddon?
Ah, well, that's one of the motivation. That's the boogeyman in the IT ecosystem. The Armageddon is essentially what I could give you some previews of coming attractions. For example, if you've heard about the Mirai botnet of some
Mirai,
years ago,
that's right.
Mirai, yeah.
Yeah. The
So
the
Mirai
the
botnet,
password was XC5211, I think, for the root account.
right? And it basically targeted worldwide a bunch of consumer grade DVR
Mm,
cameras and IP routers.
mm,
Very much consumer devices that are deployed in huge numbers, right?
mm,
Massive numbers worldwide. And essentially, what this creates is a kind of a monoculture, right? So this is my vision of IoT Armageddon. We are herding animals, humans. We follow the trends, right? Uh, Not all of us, but many of us do. We buy the same types of phones. We use the same types of these IoT appliances and consumer type devices like Ring doorbells,
mm,
Amazon Echoes, TV, smart TV dongles, right? If you think about it, like maybe it's not the same in your neck of the woods, but where I live, pretty much every second house, maybe more than every second, has a Ring doorbell. And they'll have a bunch of echoes of various types in the houses. So you compromise one of them, you compromise all of them, right? So essentially, finding a backdoor, a zero-day exploit, would result in a kind of an Armageddon.
mm,
Now you might say, what's the danger, right? If these are consumer devices, but as Mirai botnet shows us, the adversaries can be nation states or large, hacktivist groups or criminal organizations, and their goal might be to snoop on people, right? If these are sensing devices, especially with video capability, and then record and extort money. They may be to perform hostile actuation, like unlock all doors or lock all doors if there's a smart locks. Or it may be zombification, which is what Mirai botnet did. It didn't really attack sensing or actuation. It attacked the devices by introducing essentially malware that was sitting there quietly until instructed by a command and control center to
mm,
hose a certain IP address or a set of addresses. And so a trickle from one device to a victim IP address is nothing. But millions and millions of devices worldwide trickling to the same victim address create a flood and congest the internet. So I don't think we have yet appreciated the potential danger of what I sort of facetiously call the IoT Armageddon.
yeah. And I suppose we nearly had it with Heartbleed. Heartbleed exposed millions of devices that were based on Linux and were very hard to update. One single
Yep.
packet could actually reveal the running memory, which would reveal passwords and so on. So we're very lucky to get away with that one, but it could happen again
Yep.
sometime in the future. So I
That's
think
right.
some of your work has looked at side channel analysis, and you have an interesting paper on how a computer mouse can create an acoustic side channel. Could you just outline how that works?
Uh, it's not as dramatic as the paper's title or abstract might seem, but it is a kind of a side channel. The idea is that when you use an external mouse, I mean, the same is true about internal mice, but to a much lesser extent. But when you use an external mouse on a surface, right? Let's say it's a plastic desk or wooden desk or a metal desk. There's friction, right? I mean, there's obviously has to be friction. Yes, exactly. And it doesn't matter whether the mouse is wired or Bluetooth because it's a physical object. And what you do is you, of course, move the mouse. Yeah. And you click on it, right? Depending on how many keys your mouse have, there's maybe a rotating dial, maybe, and there's usually two, uh, keys you click on, sometimes three. They create different sounds. The movement also create different sounds, of course, depending on the surface. But the idea is this. So if you and I are colleagues and we work in the same space and I have let's say a smartphone that I put somewhere near you or under your desk, or even not a smartphone, like some kind of smart microphone, I can record the sounds that you make with your mouse. And as I do that, I could pretty much determine where on the screen you're moving your mouse to, right? You're moving it up and down, angle, and then what you're clicking, right click, left click, are you rotating the dial, etc. And so it doesn't give you it's not like pointing a camera at the screen from somewhere behind your shoulders. But it does this acoustic data. It does represent a side channel, right? So when recorded, it gives one an idea, especially if you are a kind of a typical office worker and you follow a routine, right? Like you know what applications are going to be open, you know what you're going to be, the task you're going to be doing. You can pretty much determine what somebody is doing based on the emanations of the mouse.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. And how do you leak information from keystroke timing videos?
So it's based on a age-old observation that uh, if you know the intervals between successive keystrokes, then and know that it's a, let's say, a QWERTY keyboard, right? So you have to know the keyboard layout. So let's say in the United States, it's QWERTY, right? And so I know the layout of the keyboard. So the by recording or by knowing the timing, the exact timing difference between two successive key presses, you can figure out which two keys were pressed because they are distinct. So your fingers, as they move from Q to S, create a different, you know, time delta than, let's say, from Q to U or Q to M, right? So between most pairs of keys, there is a distinct transition timing. So this is not something we came up with, right? This is well known for over 20 years. What we realized is that, and actually it happened in one of my classes as I was hooking up my laptop to the projector. This is some years ago, and I'm hooking up laptop to the projector, and then what I do is I type my username and password to log in.
Mm.
And as I'm typing my username, who cares? Not interesting. But as I type my password, which is not very short, right? Because it has to be long enough. Anybody who is in the audience can record me typing. What they don't
Yeah.
see is my password. They don't see my password because it's covered by asterisks, right? Or
Mhm.
whatever masking character is being used. But what I see is the timing, you see, of the asterisk appearing every time I type a letter.
Mhm.
And that leaks information of the inter-keystroke timing. So if my password is uh, Jean Tsudik, I don't know, one bang or something like that. But from G to E, there's one transition timing. From E to N, there's another, and N to E is yet another, etc. So by recording this several times, consistently and precisely, with even a regular camera, like a smartphone camera, you can learn a bit about my password. You might not be able to exactly learn my password, but you will
Yeah.
definitely rule out a lot of the like potential password space.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose, I mean, a lot of us actually use passwords that are fairly predictable in their structure. Like we typically
Yep.
use an uppercase letter at the start.
Yes.
If we're using words, we will use uppercase for each of the words. We put the numbers at the end. And then I've done some research on this. The exclamation mark is the most popular symbol because it's the first one actually on the keyboard, well, in QWERTY type
Yeah,
things.
and also, but along the lines that you just said, not only is it popular, it's usually the last, right?
Yeah, it's the
And it's
last
easier to
one.
put in
That's
last.
true.
And if you are mandated to put in a number, well, guess what?
Yeah.
it's the same key. It's one, right? It's
One,
one
one, one,
or
or
an
one, two,
exclamation,
three.
but they are the same key. Just put a
Yeah,
shift there. So that's rather predictable, right?
yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. And I think you've published work on verifiable videos. I mean, it's obviously a big issue just now about whether a video is real or fake. Can you outline the methods that are used with this, and what are the barriers for the adoption of this type of technology?
Yeah. Again, like many of the efforts we discussed, this is highly collaborative work. It falls. It has much less to do with cryptography than other things, although there is some crypto underlying it. But it has to do a lot with system security and even some machine learning techniques. Um, but let me say that set the stage. So you understand, everybody knows about deep fakes, right? Visual content, whether it's photos or videos. They're all over the place. We have no idea what to trust, right? It takes lots and lot of experts and a lot of cycles to figure out whether something is potentially false, right? A fake, or potentially true. And even then, we're not always completely sure. So the detection of deep fakes, photos or videos, is essentially a rat race with the creation of deep fakes. The same people, see, the same technology that helps, let's say, the adversary to create deep fakes helps the good guys, if you will, to detect them. So they're kind of like there's a symbiotic relationship there. And we believe that this race or rat race, arms race is going to be going for a while. And I don't think there's any light at the end of the tunnel. So we decided to approach the problem in a sort of different way. Instead of trying to detect where something is a deep fake, we're trying to prevent deepfakes by saying, well, you can only trust stuff that comes out of a trusted camera, and essentially a trusted device that encompasses a trusted camera. And so the idea is that you take images, frames that come from the analog world, and as soon as they become digital, you sign them, or you hash them and maybe sign later, but you essentially preserve the integrity so that no application, no operating system, no hypervisor can later like modify this and claim that it came from this camera and this phone. So it's an architectural approach. It doesn't produce any kind of like voodoo or any kind of magic. It's an architectural approach based on some fundamental secure hardware features and some clever algorithms that try to do this efficiently, right? Efficiently sign and preserve the integrity of visual content. And again, should giving credit to where credit is due. This is highly collaborative, and the lion's share of the work is done by a group of my colleague at UCI named Ardalan Mirisani, and one of his PhD students is the lead here. His whole dissertation is about essentially incremental advances in this area. And last one actually is you might be interested to hear. It's really about analog fakes. So the idea is we know how to design a secure camera and make it part of a smartphone-like environment where anything that is filmed or photographed is going to have integrity and authenticity. So you can trust that it's not a digital fake. But what you don't know is if somebody puts let's say, a cutout of, I don't know, Trump or the White House in the background and then takes a picture of that, right? That's not a digital fake. That's called an analog fake. And so the last effort that we made in this direction is trying to detect such analog fakes by using various measurements of like flatness, right? We can detect flat objects and say, well, you should be suspicious of this photo because you see it contains flat objects that look like three-dimensional objects. Now, what we don't know if somebody creates, let's say, 3D prints a small White House and puts it in the background, we won't be able to tell. So that's like a limitation.
I see, yeah. So it's analog picture trying to detect what the fake elements are. And obviously
Yeah.
for digital photography, we now have cameras with a private key in a secure enclave that can actually sign. And I see
Exactly.
the application areas. And the problem with that is getting the adoption within the media industry to make sure that they only accept this type of camera, this type of digital signing. That's the problem with these blockchain type methods is that adoption. So another area I
You're
think
absolutely
you've
right.
worked on is captcha. I really dislike captcha. I must admit, it annoys me that I seem to get, especially from the UK, I see US images of traffic lights and what we would call zebra crossings. I don't know when in the US what
Yeah,
you
zebra
would call
crossings.
them,
Yeah, yeah,
crossings, and they
yeah.
don't look like the images that I would actually know. And I always struggle if it says identify a motorbike and I actually see a bicycle in the image.
Right,
Am I am
right.
I am I meant to say that there's nothing there or not? So it confuses me. But I think you've done some research and looking at the latest methods. Do you still think CAPTCHA is a good method for human identification?
Um, Frankly, um, my opinion is very predictable. I think CAPTCHAs long ago outlived their usefulness as a barrier against bots. I think the original idea of from CMU was very nice, very interesting, very novel. At the time, it had some efficacy for, I don't know, some years. But I think by right, maybe 2011, 2012, I think it's basically it was done. It's simply like the great global annoyance
Hmm.
today, right? It's like who is not annoyed by captchas? There we tried to calculate with some back of the envelope means the amount of human time spent on captchas. And it's staggering. I mean, I could refer you to the paper. I don't want to bore you with details, but it's staggering. And if we were to be paid for that time, that represents gazillions lost. Uh, Captchas are done long ago. They do, however, have purposes that are not useful to us humans. Uh, for example, companies that offer captchas, like Google chiefly, we believe, we and my co-authors on those papers believe that Google benefits from them. They get labeled data sets, right? We
Hmm.
essentially provide free labor by labeling. When you say, oh, identify zebra crossings, well, you're essentially telling them which quadrants of the picture, right? Which what are they called? Vignettes contain
Hmm.
fire hydrants, zebra crossings, bicycles, traffic lights, et cetera, et cetera. And indeed, as you noted, they are very US centric, which shows kind of a bit of an arrogance there. They're not culturally always appropriate, right? So the terminology, even like probably confuses people in the UK, and we are supposed to be speaking more or less the same language. Uh, but okay, we can forgive them that. But this so essentially continually deploying this technology that is fairly useless because bots, we know for sure that bots are better than humans at solving essentially all modern captchas. And some of the other types of non-captcha mechanisms so the Google is funny here. It uses the word reCAPTCHA to denote even like click here, this mode where you
Yeah,
have to ask to click here if you are not a bot or if you're human.
yeah,
Well,
just
that's
a
not
single
strictly
click.
capture of any sort
No.
because you see, capture stands for completely automated private Turing test to tell computers and humans apart.
Mhm.
Sorry, public Turing test.
Yeah.
There's nothing public about this hitting the little button that says I'm human. It is a method that Google uses to collect behavioral information about a browser, in this case, usually a browser client user. And so they don't tell us what the information they collect. It's a very private thing for them, right? It's kind of a black box. So to call it capture is a misnomer. But all these other things that, the vignettes or the pictures segmented into parts where you're supposed to like label every or click on everything that contains a certain target object, or the sliders that you see in some other countries, or the puzzles, or the turning a donkey to its proper position or a monkey in its proper position. You've seen maybe those. There's a less common, but they happen. I mean, they're all kind of a waste of time because bots are better. But they do have one legitimate use. Uh, I think that legitimate use is to slowing us down. So suppose you have essentially average users who are too quick to click on, let's say, a phishing link, right, in their email, for example. And so if you could slow them down by showing them a captcha with that link, maybe they will take time and read it and not click so fast. So as a barrier against rushing to something stupid, doing something stupid, we humans could benefit from captchas, but not for that's not their intended purpose.
Yeah. And I think a key challenge in your research is to show proofs of things like execution, erasure, updating, and resetting. What are the methods that could be used for this, and what are the key application areas?
Ah, those things are related to what we talked about earlier
Mm,
in the context of attestation, if you recall. So, attesting a device, like making sure that it runs, that it's the device you think it is, and it runs appropriate software, is one thing. But suppose that the device doesn't run appropriate software. Suppose a device is infected with malware, right? What do you do? Well, you could throw it away. You could turn it off, but that's not very intelligent or scalable, right? Because it relies on the owner, the user. But if you have a global infestation of malware, what you need to do is you need to maybe reset the device. Some malware will go away if the device is simply reset. Some malware will go away, not with reset, but maybe with like erasure of the software, right? Some kind of return to the virgin state. And sometimes you need to actually update the software. And these types of actions, in order to get rid of malware, right? You need to update the software. And so these actions cannot be done like best effort. You generally want them to be done with some guarantees, like this will be done, right? You cannot just send a request to a device saying, "Oh, reboot yourself," and let go. No, you need to actually make sure the device will reboot itself and send you some kind of a confirmation. And so that requires, again, some of these more architectural approaches to security, where there has to be a small amount of trusted code and a little bit of trusted hardware on the device in order to make sure that no hostile code, no malware can interfere, let's say, with receiving important commands like reset yourself or erase yourself, etc.
mm. I've been an editor-in-chief of a journal, and I've been an editor-in-chief of a new journal, and I know how difficult that is. You're trying to create this upward trajectory as to making the journal more prestigious, better quality all the time, and I know the workload is absolutely horrendous. So, what were the key challenges for you being the editor-in-chief of such a prestigious journal, such as the ACM journal?
Uh, well, my job was not as hard as yours.
Mm,
Bootstrapping in journalism, I think, is very hard.
yeah.
I took over from a competent person, a previous editor-in-chief, and it was a respected journal already. Uh, well, what I had to do, my biggest challenges were finding reliable associate editors and people who would actually do the work.
Yeah.
And that was NP hard. I mean, I managed mostly. Um, and then finding the reviewers, right? Finding the reviewers. So, my work was done a while ago. This was like well over, let's say, 12 years ago, something like that. Uh, Even back then, it was hard to find reviewers because journal papers are longer than conference papers. And so you really need to get into the paper. You need to be an expert. And so I was trying always to avoid like PhD students because they, no disrespect to PhD students, but they
Yeah.
simply don't have the expertise and the patience to review journal papers.
Mm,
They tend to go quite deep. You need actual professionals,
mm,
researchers, ideally, with some expertise in that specific area to give a thoughtful review. And so that was also very hard, and then getting people to do it on time, because the bane of journals has been traditionally the length of time it takes to get a decision. And then chasing after late reviewers, especially when you have like 4 reviews out and 3 come back, and there's one laggard, right? And what do you do? Um, yeah, that was tough. That was tough. But also sometimes journals are a bit too preoccupied with impact factor and all these other silly things,
Yeah.
kind of like we tend to be preoccupied with citation, H
Mm.
indices and number citations. Those are kind of silly things. They mean something, but they don't
Mm.
mean a heck of a lot. And they don't certainly mean everything. So, for example, the more papers you publish in a journal, often the higher the impact factor. But at the time, I thought that less is better, or less is
Mm.
more, in terms
Mm.
of publishing very high quality articles is better than a few of those, better than, let's say, publishing best of, like a lot of journals will have best papers from, CrappyCon, some
Yeah.
conference somewhere and there's really little control on what
Mm.
best means in the context of every conference. So I have tried to avoid those types of special issues with dubious selection. Um, but the whole notion of journal publication, uh, even back then, was going through kind of a transformation. It's hard to say whether there is any future in journals. While at the same time, it's the conferences are essentially bursting at the seams, and it's hard to say what their future is. So
Yeah.
I think as an academic community, especially in computer science, we stand in this crossroads where journals are not the way to go, but conferences don't seem to be the way to go either.
No. And
So
I suppose
yeah,
we have the issue of Gen AI being used for peer review. Increasingly,
yeah,
there is evidence that around 1 in 8 papers in one conference that I've seen were Gen AI reviews, and the Gen AI generally gave a more positive review because it doesn't really understand the underlying research and is just taking what the authors have actually said. So, what's your viewpoint on sketchy and predatory journals and conferences?
I encountered some of that early on when I was in relatively early 2000s, when I was roped into, willingly roped into at the time to being a program chair of one such fairly predatory venue. And the experience left me very disappointed, and I started being very suspicious, as I should have been from the start, about the organizations that put out such conferences. I don't want to name names, of course,
No.
but there are lots of shady or disreputable organizations that take part in this predatory publishing. Some of them pretend to be nonprofit. Pretend is the key word here. Some of them are blatantly for profit. They troll the internet. They write huge numbers, send huge numbers of spam, inviting people to guest edit or contribute or this and that. And I think they do tend to appeal to, like spam. They appeal to some people, right? There are some people who fall for that. And it's unfortunate, right? Because a lot of times people actually lose money because I've seen some of those predatory publishers, they demand money to publish, right? So essentially, when you start demanding money just to publish, it creates an interesting market for publications.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that our stalwarts in computer science, like ACM and IEEE, are above reproach. I essentially view them as benign mafias, more or less benign
Mm.
mafias. They're just old and established, as opposed to some others. But I do not particularly trust them to maintain quality, because I've
Yeah.
seen uh, lots of examples of IEEE affiliated or sponsored conferences with dubious and even embarrassing
Yeah.
content,
Yeah.
and fewer, but some ACM
Mm.
sponsored
Yeah.
conferences where people create their own sinecures, right? They work in, I don't know, cryptographic underwater basket weaving, and then they complain that nobody wants to publish that work, so they manage through some connections or simple annoyance to create a international conference on cryptographic basket weaving, and of course
That's good.
where they publish their own and their own friends' papers.
Yeah.
Uh, it's a pretty common phenomenon, unfortunately. I think in this sense, cryptographic conferences, right? IACR, tend to be
Mm.
much better.
Yeah.
There might be lessons to be learned there because I've had not as many experience with ICR because I only had a few papers in all the Asia crypto
Mm.
PKC type venues, but my experience with them has always been better than this with ACM and IEEE.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. And obviously it's the review panels tend to be really strong, and rather than
Yes.
just a random collection of professors that you find
Yeah.
across the world. So I think there is a lot of integrity in the IACR work, and I've got a lot of respect for that community. So if you could change one thing about your career, what would it have been?
Uh, if I could change, I would have liked to, as we started talking about crypto and my interest and uh, progression of my interest in crypto. I wish I had actually taken more crypto courses as
Yeah,
a younger researcher.
yeah,
I thought I could learn a lot on my own, and I did some, but I think I could have used a bit more rigor.
yeah,
When I was in my, let's say, late 20s, early 30s, and was already out of the graduate school and working as a researcher, but still would have been better if I had taken more coursework
yeah.
in that area.
I
Definitely.
think things like finite fields and number theory is
Yes, and
such an interesting topic, but for some reason it isn't taught that much from mathematicians and maths
yeah,
courses.
and back then, the timing I'm thinking like late 90s, mid to late 90s, even early 2000s, elliptic curves were just like in there, quite nascent at the time,
Yeah.
right? And I wish I had taken the time to learn. I mean, I did learn a little bit, but definitely not enough to design anything interesting with elliptic curve. I use them as black boxes, as bricks in some constructions that I've, come up with. Um, and the same goes for lattices, right? Today,
Mhm.
especially like fully homomorphic encryption techniques and some post-quantum techniques based on lattices. And I wish I could be conversant, but sadly I'm not.
Yeah. And it was strange that elliptic curves took many years to even take off. I think Neil Kobolitz and Victor S. Miller published the
Yes.
papers, and it took about 5 years or so. And it's probably Satoshi Nakamoto that picked up elliptic curves and used it
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Bitcoin was the big
Well,
breakthrough.
before that, but still Miller and company, they did the pioneering early work,
Yeah.
right? They were mathematicians. They are
Mm.
mathematicians. But then it took like, I want to say Dan Bonnet
Dan
to
Bonnet,
actually
yeah, Stanford.
popularize elliptic curves
Mm.
because he came up in like early aughts, like around early 2000s, with several very elegant schemes for um, group signatures, among other
Yeah.
things, all kinds of encryption techniques and signature schemes based on elliptic curves. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for making them big, though he
Yeah.
didn't
And
originally
yeah,
publish the original work, but he did create a lot of interesting schemes out of them.
yeah. I think after Audie Shamir, uh, Dan Bonnet is probably in the top two or three of
Just about,
cryptographers
yeah.
in the world in terms of their career and their impact. And obviously, Daniel J. Bernstein has done a lot of work through Curve
Yes.
25519. And when you look at the post quantum cryptography hybrid methods, they're using his Curve 25519 for key exchange and
Yeah,
signatures.
yeah. I think when you look at cryptographers who actually made a difference in it, like transitioned or translated their work to practice,
Mm,
well, certainly Bernstein comes to mind, right? Because I think he
mm,
worked quite a bit with IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force. The other person is Hugo Kravchuk that I mentioned earlier
yeah.
in our conversation. I think he's still he worked
Mm,
for well over maybe a couple of decades and still does with IETF on
mm.
transferring that relatively theoretical body of knowledge into practical cryptographic techniques and protocols.
Yeah. My penultimate question is a difficult
Yeah,
one, and everyone has different opinions on this. Patenting or patenting in cryptography has caused lots of problems. If we look at RSA was patented, it did manage to go forward because the RSA company pushed it forward, but things like the Schnorr uh, signature method was held back because of the patent there. So, what's your opinions on patenting cryptography methods? Are they a good thing or a bad thing?
Uh, Probably gonna not make him a lot of friends with this. I'm not a fan of
Mm.
patenting cryptographic techniques. Yeah, I'm not. I mean, especially like basic encryption and signature methods. I mean, maybe if you create like a really complex superstructure on top, uh, and make it, I mean, dependent on cryptography, but without being dependent on a specific scheme. That I could see being more patentable, but and I wouldn't be so much against it. But these basic techniques, I don't think it's worked well for society
Mm.
and for the
Yeah.
research community in general when these things were patented.
Yeah. And my last question is, what does the next decade look like in cryptography?
Whoa, uh, that's a tough one. Probably, there's a 99.9% chance that anybody who asks this question is going to be wrong, and that includes me. I think, you know, homomorphic cryptography, right? Fully homomorphic cryptography is going to be going on and getting into more sophisticated areas like this arbitrary machine learning techniques performed under the umbrella of homomorphic crypto. Um, Post-quantum, I think we have today, blessed by NIST, a bunch of five, six cryptographic techniques, right, that are supposed to be quantum resistant. There is no proof of at least those that are not hash-based, right? There's one hash-based
Yeah.
technique, I think, uh,
Sphinx.
that you
Yeah.
can probably, yeah, Sphinx. I think you can
Mm.
probably sleep on that one, but or somewhat rely on that. But the other four, I mean, I wouldn't bet anything on them because the fact that they're post-quantum resistant is just because maybe, they haven't been exercised
Yeah.
enough, right? There haven't been enough attacks, and I think they probably demand the kind of attacks that don't work against that. So the kind of attacks that work against normal public key, right? Previous public key techniques don't work against those, but that doesn't mean they are resistant. So I'm skeptical about those non-hash based methods. But coming back to your real question, so I think all this machine learning and combination of machine learning and fully homomorphic encryption is going to be one thing. I think uh, use of encryption in AI is also coming up. I mean, it's an obvious thing. It's AI, ML is kind of like a pandemic. It's taken over pretty much all fields of computer science, right? And crypto is not an exception. So I see a lot of work going into that direction.
Mm.
Other than that, I haven't the foggiest.
Yeah, I agree with you on the homomorphic side, and I think can contribute a great deal to machine learning and even in training neural networks using homomorphic encryption. It can be done just now with a support vector machine where you can actually feed in homomorphically encrypted data, encrypted with the public key. It can go through a normal model and then we'll get encrypted data on output and then decrypt it. It's such a simple technique and I think it needs to be adopted wider. So thank you very much, Jean. It's been a real privilege to talk to you today, and
Likewise.
you've given me so many ideas for the future. So have a great rest of your day and
Thank
keep
you.
up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.